Hello everyone, this is my Necromancy Minion Queen Huntress build. I'm going to explain how the build works in just a second, but let me show you what the gameplay looks like first. Alright, as you can see, I'm just running around doing nothing, which means this is like the best kind of a minion build, really. Which means you just walk around, the minions kill everything, you don't have to do anything. This is a really super relaxing build in any of the game modes if you're into that kind of stuff. Alright, so I think you get the gist of it. This build requires you to solve a bunch of different problems which are posed by the Reaper that we're using. And the Reaper we're using is the Necromancy Reaper. We're currently using the primordial version, but you can use the normal one just as well. They're very similar in many ways. There's not a huge difference in terms of how good or bad or whatever they are. Really, the most important things are the same for both Reapers. And the most important thing for the Reapers is that it gives us access to this Summon Skeleton Squire Ancestral skill, which allows us to summon a skeleton at the cost of locking a fixed amount of mana. Meaning instead of costing like 50% or 20% of your mana, it costs about 400 at base. And every time you resummon or you summon the next minion, the cost goes up by 30%. But, and this is really important, currently the cost goes up by 30% of the base amount, which is around, I think, something like 800 maybe, but you're never summoning it at that way because there's a cost reduction built into the Reaper. So I think it's around 470 at base, and it goes up by 30% every time, which is very little, which means that if you stack a lot of mana, you can summon a lot of skeletons. Now, the skeleton's max life is determined by your max mana. So you want a lot of max mana because that means the skeleton has a lot of life, and it also means you can summon a lot of skeletons. The skeleton scales off your skill damage, meaning you need to find ways to increase your skill damage in order to increase the damage of the skeletons. Also, the skeleton inherits your attack speed, armor, elemental resistance, critical strike chance, and critical strike damage. Now, the most two important of those stats are armor and elemental resistance, because you need to do your very best to keep the skeletons alive, because that is crucial for your clear speed, right? So keeping your skeletons alive is priority numero uno, okay? So you need to find a way to have a lot of mana for the max life. You need to have a lot of ways to have a lot of armor and elemental resistance. Attack speed, critical strike chance, and critical strike damage are also pretty good, very important, good stats to have, but they're kind of secondary. Now, one of the stats that isn't mentioned here, but that the minions do inherit, is your movement speed. Now, that is how it works in Slormancer. The minions inherit your movement speed, so that makes it that you can run around super fast, your minions keep up with you, but they also use that movement speed to run around when they're attacking enemies, which means it is super important for a good clear speed on minion builds to have a lot of movement speed, because not only does it allow you to run faster in between packs and breaches, but it also allows your minions to get to the enemies much faster. And because the skeleton squires, who are our main damage source, are melee minions, they need to get close to the enemy. All right, so that basically outlines sort of the challenges we have to overcome to make a good Necromancy Skeleton Squire build. Now, there is a variety of different ways that you can do this, for sure, but on the Huntress, there's a really good, some might say too good way of doing this, and it comes through stat stacking a ton of evasion and then converting that evasion through a number of different chains into all the stats that you need, right? So, the first and most important conversion that you need is evasive magic from your subclass. This passive is ridiculous, and I kind of feel bad for using it. It makes me feel dirty inside, and I hope the devs will take a good hard look at this and nerf the ever-living, you know what, shit out of this skill, because it's overpowered as fuck. But what it does is it allows you to convert your full evasion to mana, meaning that you can stack a ton of evasion to get mana. Now, why is this better than stacking a ton of max mana on itself, right? Because of the way that stat scaling works in the Slormancer. Different stats have different base amounts, and there are different abilities to acquire multipliers and increase stats, and so on and so forth. And evasion, armor, and elemental resistance have a scaling factor that increases exponentially with item level, meaning that the higher your item level is, the faster and the stronger evasion, armor, and elemental resistance becomes. But evasion has the additional benefit of having higher base rolls than armor and elemental resistance, meaning that it is super easy to stack a ton of evasion. And you can see I have a bunch of level 120 gear here, and you can see 10.6k, 6.4k, 8.4k, 10.5k. Like that's just a lot of evasion, and that allows you to stack a ridiculous amount of evasion on your character, and then you can convert it very easily into max mana, which is something we need, right, for the max life of our minions, but also for the number of minions that we have, right? So that is the first conversion and the biggest one we have. We run evasive magic, and it really is almost the singular reason that we're running this subclass, right? This support class, support skill subclass, whatever you want to call it. This thing singularly, if there was no other nodes, we would still be running this class just because of this, right? Now, that solves one of our issues. What are some other issues we need to solve? We need to get a lot of armor. For that, we are using the Indomitable Mountain Chest, which I have grafted onto a helmet. Right? This is a nether item that through a bug was converted into a legendary item, but it is a nether item. And that allows us to convert 75% of our evasion to armor. It also has an evasion multiplier for some reason. Nobody knows why. I don't know why. What are we doing, right? But this is super powerful, and this gives us basically 450,000 armor, which is very, very good. And it makes it so that our minions stay alive in the netherworld, in the forge, and we don't need to resummon them, which keeps our clear speed up very well. The second problem we have to solve is elemental resistances. So how do we convert elemental resistances? Now, so the first conversion we're doing is we're using toughness 15, which converts 25% of our armor into elemental resistance. So we're converting evasion to armor to elemental resistance. So that's already 112,000. And then we're using an additional conversion chain which relies upon Elemental Wizard. Elemental Wizard gives us elemental damage based upon your max mana. We have a lot of max mana, right? So it gives us a lot of elemental damage, which we kind of can't really use right now. Now there are build variations, I think, that you can do where the elemental damage actually plays a part, which is really cool. But currently in this setup and in the current, let's say, bugginess level of the game, it is not really super useful. There's a similar setup for evasion, but the conversion is much lower. It's only 10% without the legendary effect of the ring that I'm wearing, which gives us an additional rank. It's 10%, and here it's 15%. So we're of course using the 15% because it's just a lot more. So now we're converting that into elemental damage, and then through the force transmission node, we're converting our elemental damage, 68% of it, to elemental resistance. So it is a ton of elemental resistance. Now 70,000 might not look like a lot, right? When you're looking at the big numbers that I'm throwing around, but it is a lot in the context of the game. And that gives us 210,000 elemental resistance. So that gives us it gives us a ton of minions, and it gives us a ton of survivability. Now we need to figure out how do we get damage, right? And obviously if you have a lot of mana, you can lock, and we have an inherent tool to lock a lot of mana. As you guys can see, I'm locking all of my mana right now. And that means we can use Raw Lock. And Raw Lock gives us raw damage based upon the total amount of mana we have locked. Now, we have almost 600k of mana locked right now. So that gives us a lot of mana. So about 168,000 raw damage. Now, you might say, hey, the numbers don't add up. Don't worry about it. We'll get there. I'm going to explain it. I'm going to explain everything. So that is super important, right? We are locking a ton of mana. We are creating a ton of mana. We're locking a ton of mana, and that gives us a lot of raw damage. So we have damage. We have survivability. Now we need to figure out the rest of the stuff, but we have to really figure out the biggest things. There is an additional benefit to having a lot of minions, and that benefit is Willpower 45. And Willpower 45 grants us 10% minion increased damage for every minion we control. Now, we can create a lot of minions, which means we get to about 5,500% minion increased damage without rolling it a single time on our gear as a stat, right? And that's also why the Necromancy Reaper, the primordial one, isn't really that big a deal, right? It gives us 134% increased minion damage. That's like nothing, really, right? The multiplier on the base Reaper is really good, but that has nothing to do with the primordial Reaper. Okay, and that is basically it. In terms of other gear choices that we're running Heart of Darkness, which is another chest effect for an additional evasion multiplier, which is of course exactly what we want to do. And then we're using movement speed in a bunch of different slots. That means, of course, we are using Sandals of Speed, which gives us an actual movement speed multiplier. We're grafting triple pure movement speed in the base slot from boots or belts in a bunch of different slots because that is just super important. Like, movement speed is one of the single most important things. We have the amulet, for instance, also has movement speed. And aside from that, I'm also using the Champion's Present, which increases our ancestral gift ranks, which is, it's not good. Like, this ring needs replacing, and there's a clear best choice for that is currently not working as intended, which is why we can't use it, but I'm going to talk about that later. We're using all 3 Necromancy items, which are pretty cool because each of them grants us access to a different minion, and it also grants us a bunch of minion increased damage, which might be really nice if you're progressing, because minion increased damage once you're in the late game, this is nothing, right? Getting an additional 225% is like, or even a little bit more, like, isn't really that big a deal. But earlier on, this might be pretty good. You get the minions. The minions are very cool looking. Unfortunately, their behavior currently is designed in such a way that they practically don't do anything for us. The Colossus has a huge AoE smash attack, like the Colossuses that you encounter as enemies, which is really nice. Which would be really nice for minion builds usually, right? Because that gives you a lot of AoE clear. The problem is his wind-up time is so long that it basically makes it impossible for us to use him effectively for clearing, because the squires kill everything ahead of time. The wizard is really cool. It teleports around. The sheet damage looks really nice because it scales off elemental damage. The problem is it shoots a singular projectile. The projectile is super slow, and on top of that, the wizard misses all of the time. Like, actually just misses standing enemies a lot of the time. And then we have the skeleton archers, which we can summon a bunch of, right? Which is pretty cool. But the problem of the skeleton archers is, again, there's your projectiles. The arrows they shoot is too long. The attack time is too slow, which means they basically never really get to do anything. It's just really sad. So we're still using them. They're on the build I had them on the build because I was testing them out and seeing how they work. They're additionally, and I'm going to mention this, is they're bugged in such a way that I think they are not benefiting from the stats that the tooltip says they're benefiting, because their damage is a lot lower than that of the squires, despite the sheet damage being a lot higher. Like, the archer actually has lower skill damage, but the wizard, for instance, has like huge elemental damage, 150%, and the colossus has 70%. So the colossus should deal a lot more damage, and they don't right now. So these are really sort of vanity items right now. I still wear them. I think the minions look super dope. I hope they get fixed. I've made suggestions and given feedback to the devs, so maybe in the future they will be better. What else are we using? We're using right now Steaming Ancestral Fervor, which gives us additional crit chance, which is pretty good. The skeleton scale with this, it's an inherent amulet effect, so you can use this just right off the bat. Very nice for us because the summon skeleton squire skill is an ancestral skill, which we can just continually cast. It has a 1-second cooldown, which gives us an additional 15-16% crit chance just like that, which is really nice, especially in the earlier parts of the game. And then lastly, we're using Crimson Pact, and the reason we're using Crimson Pact is that it allows us to overlock our mana. As you guys can see, I can still cast my skills, right? And that is because I'm spending mana, and that allows me to lock out all of my mana, summoning more minions, and by summoning more minions, getting more damage, and also just more minions deal more damage, right? And it also, the more minions you have, the better your AoE clear is going to become. Okay. Now, there's an additional thing that I need to talk about, and that is, as I've talked about a lot now, more minions means it's better, and for that we use Auramancer because it reduces mana lock costs by up to 40%. So 40% cost reduction means a lot more minions, and a lot more minions means a lot more damage, and that is a good thing. So you definitely want to use that. In terms of skill choices, we're using Architect of Death, Evasive Magic, and Force Transmission are really the most important things. You can use Force of Nature, right? That's 25% elemental damage. It's not that big a deal because most of our elemental damage comes through conversions and doesn't benefit from this, but it's better than nothing. Patience is a virtue is good. That is a multiplier that's not working as intended currently. I'm talking a lot about bugs. A lot of things in this game work really well, but this build, there are a lot of buggy interactions. The multiplier doesn't show up in your stat sheet as a multiplier, and the value seems to be much lower than 25%. It seems to be closer to, I think, 5% right now. We're using Arrow Shot, and we're really using Arrow Shot for Arrow of Illusion, which gives us another 25% evasion multiplier, really. And lastly, you're using Immortal Arrow, but not for the actual Immortal Arrow and the cast, but rather for the Wandering Arrow, which is the passive effect that comes out when you're not casting a Mortal Arrow. That means that that arrow is going around all the time. And if you're never casting a Mortal Arrow or barely casting it, they're going all the time. And one of the things that the tooltip doesn't state, but that is the case, is the Wandering Arrow is considered a minion for the purposes of damage scaling, but not for the purposes of willpower 45. So having more Immortal Arrows doesn't increase your minion damage itself, but the Immortal Arrow scales with minion damage. And as you guys can see, it's close to 20 million sheet damage here for the Wandering Arrow, which is really good. If you're trying to progress with this build, I think you should definitely focus on Wandering Arrow in the beginning, because Wandering Arrow is just much easier to scale. They can't die, which is a big problem for the squires early on. If you don't have really good gear, the squires are just going to die a lot. So focusing on Wandering Arrow is a really good choice to get the build going. The single target damage is going to be great. The crits are going to be huge. You're going to have a great time. You can cast it every once in a while, right? Because of Academic's Arrow giving you a critical strike chance bonus for Wandering Arrow. We're using, of course, and it also gives you an additional Wandering Arrow. We're, of course, using Companions, which gives you 2 additional Wandering Arrows, so we get more. So you cast it every once in a while, or you cast it once, and you're basically done. The damage also scales with Mastery rank, so we're putting all of our Gear Mastery on here for these purposes. Now, in the late game, the Squires are just much better because they have much greater, they move much faster, and there's a lot more of them, meaning they have much better AoE clear. Like, it's not comparable. So in the late game, you really want to focus on squires, which is one of the reasons that I am not using the Pauldrons of Eternity, or no, the Squad of Eternity, which gives you additional Wandering Arrows, which is an effect. Like, if you want to focus on Wandering Arrows, this is something you absolutely 100% want to use. Now, additionally, alternate choices, there are a bunch of them. There is the Vision of Relentless Transference. Oh, I got an amulet here, which every time you deal Ancestral Strike damage, you gain a damage multiplier to indirect damage. Indirect damage is any damage that isn't dealt by your primary and secondary skill. Meaning that, for instance, that means this skill damage portion, stuff that usually most of the stuff that is written in the core description or tooltip of the skill, that is considered direct damage. Like additional effects, like let's say there's this bolt upgrade like this is not direct damage. This would be indirect damage, but the 460,000 damage that the Immortal Arrow itself does, that is direct damage. And that means that the Relentless Transference power would be really good for our squires. It would be a huge damage multiplier, 100%, doubling our damage. The problem is, like, where are we going to get these Ancestral Strikes from? Because we're not using our skills, and our minions are killing enemies so quickly that it makes it basically impossible to use early on, which means I don't think this is a particularly good effect for this build right now. If you actually are casting, let's say, Arrow Shot, or if you figure out a way, that can be a really potent effect. Now, I've talked about the best in slot ring that we're not using because it's not working currently, and that is the Jewel of Yggdrasil, right? Which reduces the cost of your second and of the skill in your second ancestral slot by 20%. And note that it says costs, meaning it's not restricted to mana cost. So it works for everything, and it does work for mana lock that you get from equipment, from Ancestral Legacy. So if you, for instance, want to reduce the amount of mana lock you get or life lock you get from a certain effect, you can use this as well, and it should work for our squires, but currently it does not work for effects and ancestral skills you get from your equipment. And meaning, so currently it doesn't do anything, which is pretty sad right now. So that is a lot of the different things that you need to know about the build. One of the last things that I want to mention is ultimatums. You have a lot of choice. I wouldn't be really that picky and choosy. I use the area damage reduction one just for shits and giggles. Not that big a deal. If you're progressing and you can't get your movement speed up, getting the speed ultimatum is always a good choice. Or getting the crit damage ultimatum is also a great choice because it will take you a while to get over 280% just of rolls, right? In terms of affixes, what you're looking for on your gear, you're looking for evasion, attack speed, crit chance, crit damage. That is really it. You probably want armor penetration. I have 100% elemental penetration because I was hoping that the wizards would be doing a lot of things and they didn't. But you probably want that. You want crit chance. Of course, you want 100% tenacity. As in all builds, we're using 100% tenacity is required. And then you can use a bunch of resistances as well. That is pretty good. Cooldown reduction, not really a priority on the build. Now, one of the things that we need to talk about is there is a good chance that you're going to get one shot with this build if you're not paying attention, because as you can see, our life is very low. So we're using another very balanced part of the of the of the sort of tool set that you get in the Slormancer. It's very ethical. Of course not. We're using Thornbite Rune. We have a ton of armor. We have a ton of evasion. We have a ton of elemental resistances, meaning we can stack up a huge Thornbite shield, right? Which is super good at keeping us from getting one shot. There is this very short moment because we don't have a super convenient trigger. We have to use Astoria, so we have to kill 50 enemies, and depending on the mission, that might take a while to do. So there's it's probably good idea to run one cheat death effect. Now on this build currently, yes, this is a cape. Don't look at the icon, but this is a cape. I put a helmet effect on it, which is the Unyielding Will. I don't think this is really good. I don't think Unyielding Will is the best one you want to use. You probably definitely want to use Phoenix Feather or Astoria's Last Will. Those are the two. Here, Young Phoenix Feather, which basically makes you invulnerable for the next 2 seconds. This has a very long cooldown, but it doesn't really matter. Like, the cooldown is irrelevant because once you got your Thornbite Shield going, you're completely basically invulnerable. Outside of one little moment. This is a secondary second cheat death effect, which is Astoria's Last Stand. Finally found it. When you get defeated, you get a huge it gives you, basically makes you invulnerable for 3 seconds afterwards. So it's a very similar effect. It's a very similar effect, has a much shorter cooldown. Both of these are just fine. I would run one of them just to prevent getting one shot. You can of course also run the belt, but that is just not as reliable in my opinion, because for us you might just get 2 shot or something. That still can happen, right? Let's see if I still have one of those belts here. There should be one. Yeah, this is the Unbreakable Barrier, Ara's Unbreakable Barrier. Whenever you're dealt damage, the damage cannot exceed a certain amount. So that avoids you getting 2 shot, but since we're not evading, you can still get killed. So I would really recommend you run one of the actual cheat death effects. The last thing that I want to talk about is about the gameplay. As you guys saw in the very beginning, I showed you how the gameplay looks and how I play most of the time, which means I just walk around and everything dies. That is not sort of the optimal way, because it means that you're not using the evasion multiplier from arrow shot, and it means you're not using the evasion multiplier from your turret syndrome, right? From your turret, from your support skill, and you're also not triggering the Ancestral Fervor, which gives you a lot of crit chance. So the actual best way of playing this build would be to hold down arrow shot, to hold down your skeleton, summoning skeleton squire skill, and to also hold down your support skill. This is what would be the ideal gameplay, because that gives you the most evasion, right? You can see 800k evasion, or mana, but that is really also evasion. It goes up by a lot, and the movement speed isn't really impaired because we have close to 90% attack speed, which means the animation is just super short for arrow shot. The last thing I want to talk about is now, and this is an annoying thing, is the way that skeleton summoning works is really annoying in the game. So let's unsummon our skeletons, which you can do by switching a Reaper. as you guys can maybe tell, it might take a long time to summon these skeletons. And the mana lock cost is fixed. So if you have mana, you can lock it. And if your mana pool gets reduced, right, for whatever reason, and you have more mana lock than you have mana pool, your mana gets overlocked, meaning you are completely out of mana, which you guys saw there. And that is really what happened. I sit in town, I hold down the 3 buttons, right? You hold Arrow Shot, Turret Syndrome, and Skeleton Squires, and you just sit around and you wait. And sometimes the Skeleton Squires don't want to keep summoning. And you guys can see, like, this is taking a long ass time, because we're summoning a lot of squires. And you have to remember, because of all the cost reductions we have, the increase in mana cost is like 100, 130 every time we cast a new skeleton. We have 800k mana. We start at 400, so we need to summon a lot of skeletons to lock out all of our mana, and that is honestly a really annoying experience. You can start running with a lot less skeletons than this, right? But, well, that's not optimal. So that's a little bit annoying, I'm not gonna lie. This is a pretty annoying part of playing the build, but it's not the worst. Alright, while I'm doing this, I'm just gonna talk. I think the minions are really good. I think this build is a lot of fun to play. In the Forge, I wouldn't summon the wizards, because the wizards can have a really weird interaction where they sometimes get sort of hung up and they just teleport in place, and enemies also get hung up and they try to attack the wizard that's teleporting in place. And this can be really annoying in the Forge because of the attack leash and all that stuff. So to have the true AFK playstyle, avoid summoning the wizards in the Forge, right? So now we have basically locked as much mana as we can, and as you guys see, the multipliers are disappearing and we're completely locked out. The lock amount stays the same, right? So the game still counts all that mana that we locked before fully, which is pretty good. So that's basically it. I hope you guys like this build. I think it is a ton of fun to play. I think it's very chill and very relaxing to run battlefields. You can AFK in the Forge basically, which is also pretty cool. And if you guys have more cool tech or cool ideas, please let me know. I'm always curious. I always want to learn more stuff. And I see you guys next time.